Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of VI Shots Live. We come to you from the VI Shots Live studio, all the way in sunny California. And today we have, again with us, the lovely and talented Jack Dunaway. Jack, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. That's the nicest compliment I think I've gotten this episode.
Jack's always a ever-present fixture on the show. We've been trying to get rid of him, but he just doesn't want to leave. So he's always there. But we're glad to have you back, Jack. And he's helping me host today's episode, which is titled LabVIEW XNodes. And before we get started on that, I wanted to say thank you to everyone who's been a supporter of the show, who's been following every single episode up until now. We come every month, roughly around the end of the month. Is that correct, Jack? Around the third week of the month?
Yeah, it's like the last Wednesday or so of each month. That's typically when we try to plan it. I think next month is going to be the Wednesday just before NI week.
Yeah, we have planned a special show for next episode, so stay tuned for that. Related to NI week, actually. And the current show is being recorded with obviously a live video stream on Google Hangouts, and we're also taking questions from the audience. So if you are on Google Plus, you can go in there, and and you're watching on the right-hand side. There's a question field where you can type in your question, and we'll try to answer it on the air. To get to the question and watch the video live, you can go to vishots.com/live, and there's links there to get to the Google Plus version of the video. So you can go ahead, type in your question right now about XNodes, or what you think XNodes are, and what you've heard about them, and we can try to answer them. If you want to get notified on when the next VI Shots Live show will start and be prepared for that, you can go to vishots.com/subscribe and join the mailing list. We typically send out a mailer about a day or two before the show, letting people know what the topic is and when it's going to be airing. And if you want to give us feedback offline, you can send email to feedback@vishots.com. So let's jump right into this topic, and I like to first of all say that the topic of XNodes is very sensitive because it's not officially supported by National Instruments. So it's a feature of LabVIEW which is not officially supported. So any information we tell you on this show is use it at your own risk, and you're treading on territory that's new and hasn't been treaded by a lot of people. And there may be, dragons and other fire-breathing creatures chasing after you while you try to use these features. So you have to be careful about that. And also, if you try to get support on them from National Instruments, you will probably not get any official support. But there are various resources in the community which we'll probably touch upon in this show and tell you where to get some more information. So let's introduce our guests who have actually dabbled in XNodes and have some experience in this area. The first is Gavin Burnell, who's a lecturer in condensed matter physics at University of Leeds in the UK. Gavin, welcome to the show.
Hi, great to be here.
And we also have Jonathan Kokott. I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. He's principal at Kokott Automation LLC. And Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
And Jonathan, can you tell us a little bit about what your company does and a bit about, and where are you located, actually?
I'm located in the greater Milwaukee area. I consult for a number of companies around here, starting to do some product development using single board RIOs and general LabVIEW consultation. I'm a CLA as well, so.
Mm-hmm. So an independent contractor. It's basically. When did you start your company?
Last year, so it's been a little bit of a roller coaster, but actually been winning some contracts lately, so I'm relatively pleased.
That's great. Gavin, can you talk a little bit about your background and how long you've been working with LabVIEW and some of the stuff you worked on?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I started as a grad student in Cambridge, so it'll be 20 years this autumn of LabVIEW, so 3.0.1 on a huge stack of floppy disks running on a Mac, and sort of every so often I seem to do the sort of X.1 releases normally. So these days I'm mainly still in 2012, SP1, F5, or whatever we're up to now. So yeah, basically the sort of science we do is low noise electrical measurements at low temperatures. So we're interfacing a bunch of kit, and I end up writing most of the LabVIEW code for the research group, one way or another, which is perhaps not ideal as a lecturer, but you know, I keep hoping one of my grad students is going to get better than me and take it all out of my hands, but hasn't happened yet.
Cool. So starting off on talking about XNodes, if someone wants to jump in, feel free. We want to just give our audience a little bit of an idea of how to access this feature and what is it exactly. So who wants to jump into that?
Yeah, I can actually talk a little bit about it. So XNodes is probably one of those things that you've heard of, but maybe not necessarily known about or how to necessarily create them. But really, XNodes, there are two ways of interacting with them. One is just simply using them, which actually I think virtually all of us use XNodes. And the second is actually creating them. And so XNodes generally are used, I would say, would you guys say it's possible that maybe even every single LabVIEW application uses XNodes? Is that likely, especially if you're using RT, FPGA, if you ever use that new error ring node that came out in 2013, that's an XNode. Match regular expression node, that's an XNode also. So the proliferation of XNodes is actually pretty decent at this point. However, the one part that we're focusing a little bit more on this episode is what it means to not just be a user of XNodes, but a creator of XNodes, and what are the caveats that we're going to find with creating our own XNodes. So that's the part Mike was talking about earlier. If you try to get support, official support on creating XNodes, they are not officially supported, perhaps not even officially recognized, their existence recognized. So yeah, that's what we'll be talking about today. Actually, Gavin or John, like, why did you decide to become an XNode creator?
Well, I mean, I can say for my part, it was just sheer curiosity, really. I mean, the way I was trying to put this, I mean, XNodes is basically it's another form of polymorphism, except that it's a whole lot better than your sort of regular polymorphic VIs, because you're writing the VI, the sub VI, sort of as you drop it onto the diagram, and every time you change the wiring on it, you rewrite it. So it's really kind of a powerful technology. But I don't know. I mean, the first thing was simply just I can't remember who it was now, but someone posted a challenge on LavaG and to do with trying to extract the array dimensions as an array, and I thought, oh, I'll try this with an XNode, and that's kind of where I got started and just carried on playing, really.
So basically, it was curiosity, you'd say. So where have you gone since that? Like, is it still just a curiosity, or are you using these professionally?
Okay, so I guess this touches again on the sort of, do you trust an XNode? So what I always say if people ask me this is, I mean, yes, I do use them in my quotes production code, but I'm in a university environment, so my production code is, a couple of cryostats down in the lab. I trust my $200,000 cryostat to make them work. If I was, had a paying customer and they were doing something mission critical or life, threatening, I probably wouldn't go and use an XNode straight away. But they're pretty robust. They're pretty useful. You can write a bad XNode, like you can write bad LabVIEW code, and you can completely screw everything up and make your IDE go painfully slow. But once you have a stable XNode, they work pretty well.
Yeah. So how about you, John? Where'd you start, and where are you now with XNodes?
I started in, I guess it's 2010, because that's when this code competition was that I put a link to up here. And Darren Kay had that math node, which is a fairly incredible example of an XNode, and I just wanted to be a part of it. So I started messing around with it, and that's kind of how I got started. I thought it was an excellent way in order to add a lot of functionality and scripting within the LabVIEW coding environment in an elegant way.
Yeah, I'd say that's kind of how I got started also, in that it started off as a curiosity. However, it was very specifically to try to fill a need, and that was eliminating boilerplate code that exists inside of your application code. So in other words, if you see code that you're literally having to copy and paste everywhere, or not a code, but just a small code snippet, that you're needing to copy and paste everywhere, however, you cannot create a sub-VI around it because it's type sensitive. In other words, you can't just wire any arbitrary type into it. You end up just having to proliferate that little snippet everywhere. And what an XNode will allow you to do is, like Gavin was saying, this dynamic polymorphism without having to explicitly write every single VI. So it's a form of meta code. It's like a meta function that will accept many different types and then adapt its behavior. Not at runtime, like it's not like dynamic dispatch. It's like statically generating new code under the hood each time you wire new types into it. So basically, it started off as a curiosity, but also to fill this need of trying to get rid of unnecessary syntax. And it's ended up to where I'm actually a pretty big fan and actually using them in production now.
So I want to say that I don't use them. Well, no, I correct that. I do use them. I don't realize that I use them, right? Because a lot of functions in LabVIEW are XNodes, but I don't know that. So that could imply that they're kind of stable, but maybe they're not. But I don't I haven't created my own, and I haven't done anything like that. So for those out there that are kind of in my situation, is there something that like a checkbox I check, or like something I do in LabVIEW to enable them, and all of a sudden, hey, I got all this XNode stuff. What do I have to do to access XNodes or that functionality?
Actually, I think that's a perfect segue to jump into Gavins Demo. So Gavin is actually going to perform a screen sharing demo and show us a little bit about what an XNode is, and he's going to show us an XNode that he's actually created. And so Gavin, as you're getting that screen sharing ready, let me just briefly describe what you're going to do. So everyone here, we're all familiar with the OpenG functions and probably the array palette. When we're talking about different array functions, we've got about a dozen or so functions that have polymorphic instances. How many polymorphic instances per function? Maybe 24 or so. So by the time you look at all of the different array functions and all of the different types it can operate on, what you end up with is maybe 100, 200 or so VIs that all do essentially the same thing under the hood. That's kind of like what a polymorphic VI does. And so what Gavin recognized is he was thinking to himself, I'm speaking for you, Gavin. He's like, wait a minute, I wonder if we could do something a little bit differently and not necessarily have to write so much code. And what if we could give it even more powers than just what the regular polymorphic VIs allow? So Gavin, take it away and tell us what we're looking at on the screen here.
Right, okay, so hopefully Hangouts will do all of this for us. So what you've got on the screen at the moment is you've got two things which look like they're the OpenG filter array node. The lower one really is that one, and you were just saying about polymorphic instances, so I don't know if my right-click menu is showing up here. If it is, you can see there's a little bit more than 24
No, it's not.
instances. Okay, right, well, I'm sorry about that.
It's okay.
Hangouts is clearly not quite up to the whole lot. So if you do a right-click and do select type on one of the OpenG array things, you find there's tens and tens and tens of different bits of code.
You may be able to right-click on it and say Show Polymorphic Selector, and then that might allow us to see it.
Let's see if I can get that.
And
Okay,
then
can you see it now?
Yeah.
And do you now see a big long list of?
No.
No. Okay. LabVIEW's like this. I think it does some slightly weird things to the GDI calls. Anyway, it doesn't really matter.
So basically, what you're saying is that what you're showing us is the polymorphic version of that filter 1D array.
Yeah.
And behind the scenes is obviously a whole slew of VIs that are specific to that data type, right?
Yeah, and you really notice it when you're loading it up, because when you load up a VI which has a polymorphic sub-VI, it loads all of the sub-VIs in the development environment. Obviously, in the built environment, it can strip them out again. But okay, so that's one version of it. In the top here, so this is the XNode version. So I can just sort of wire up in the same way. So I'll just wire exactly the same lines up, and then. And again, I don't know, let's see if this is going to work. Can you see my help window? Is that showing up? Right, okay. So you'll see there it's showing you the same help. That's just providing exactly the same text that the OpenG version does. And it's chosen the right types, and it does exactly the same thing that the OpenG standard version does. Where things get interesting is when instead of wiring up to something that's a recognized type, so I'm just going to go and delete some wires out here. So now I'm going to wire up instead. I'm going to wire up to this array of enums. Okay, so it looks like the OpenG version is doing the right thing, but if you look carefully, you see it's picked up a couple of red coercion dots, and when I create an indicator on the on it there, you see in fact it's converted that to an I16, which is really not what you want happening, especially because the enums underneath are a U16, not an I16.
And plus, well, you've lost the enumeration as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, you'd have to cast that back into the type you wanted, and it's another operation. So now we can do the same with the OpenG.
Data value is preserved, but type information is lost. We've stripped the type.
Because what's happening is it's picking the most appropriate polymorph, but if you haven't written the polymorph for that type, you're screwed. Whereas the XNode, what it's doing is it's actually creating the polymorphic version as I wire it up. So as I wire it up, it suddenly jumps in and starts scripting. So now if I go and create indicator, then you can see actually I've produced, what I've actually produced is an array of enums of the right type. Okay, so let's go and just try and see if this works then. So I can actually show you what the code is looking like underneath. There's a kind of magic ini key you can put into your LabVIEW configuration file, and when you turn it on, you get which I guess you won't be able to see because it's a right-click menu, you get an extra right-click item.
We may also, Gavin, it looks like you may be sharing this one window. Should we try
sharing the desktop?
Yeah, let's try that.
Okay.
And then we would see the menus also. Yeah.
Okay, let's see if we can get this. And I'm just going to minimize my Hangouts so you're not seeing Hangouts in Hangouts and Hangouts. Okay, so you should now see a VI in the front there, which is, so this is the underlying code. So let's just go and see. I'll just close this down again, and we'll just see if you can see my right-click menu. So do you see the right-click menu now?
Yeah, we see it now.
Right, so okay, this XNode Wizard menu pops up when you turn the right ini key on, and I can just click on that generate code, and that's the underlying algorithm.
So can you go back again and redo that? And I think I missed that. So you right-click.
So you right-click, and then there's this XNode Wizard menu, which is popped in because I've got the ini key turned on, and then generate code.
Right.
And then it opens up a sort of fake sub-VI, which represents the underlying code, so you can inspect what's going on.
So this is the code that was dynamically generated to handle the enum. Okay.
Yeah. So actually what's going on, I mean, just to say a little bit about what's actually going on under the hood there, is these are OpenG array XNodes. They all basically a templating structure. So inside the code, I have a template VI, and so it just copies that in and hooks up the inputs and the outputs, and then it's LabVIEW itself. It's sort of the dynamic type propagation of LabVIEW that's kind of naturally then doing the polymorphism. So it's like you're kind of writing the VI as you're going along, but it's all sort of hidden away under the hood. So in that sense, it's like Jack was saying about boilerplate code.
Oh, and Gavin, there's one thing that you could do in the demo that might make this even a little bit clearer, and that is let's take a look at the generated code. We just saw it with the enums. So let's close that generated code, and then let's wire in that array of doubles back into the array, and then open up the generated code once more and see what's under.
Okay, so let's just see what happens. This may just end up crashing my development environment, but who knows? In fact, I tell you what, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to wire in this. Why you'd want to do this, I don't know, but if you really want to go and filter an array of error clusters, it'll do that for you. Okay, you see I've lost the wire to the indicator, but okay, that is interesting. There we go. That's the error cluster version of it. So you can see it's basically the stuff inside the sequence structure is the same, but it's now wired up arrays of errors rather than just the enums that we had before.
So can you describe what code the user has created from here? Like what is the kind of the part that we have to generate? Or
literally, you're just dropping an instance of the XNode from the palette onto the diagram.
I guess I just maybe I am not understanding that when you right-click and say Show Generated Code, doesn't LabVIEW need kind of a hint or a help as to what has to generate, or?
Okay, so what's going on? So the XNode, I mean, in some respects, the XNode is just another type of LabVIEW library. It's got a whole bunch of VIs that are called at different times. So the editor environment itself calls your VIs to go and do all the tasks it needs to go and do. So there's one VI which is called every time you change the inputs, and then there's a certain point in the process where the LabVIEW says, okay, now I actually need to have the code for this. So with this extra ini key, basically what you've got is you've got access to go and tell LabVIEW to go and call all of these various extra abilities that you've written into your XNode.
So when you talk about abilities and that type of special VIs that run at certain times, it sounds to me kind of like a XControl, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities. I mean, if you like, an XControl is scripting the front panel, and an XNode is scripting the block diagram.
Okay. So if someone's familiar with XControls and the XControl concept, they can probably grasp this. But except there's no front panel. It's basically on the diagram.
Yeah. I mean, it's all being done on the diagram rather than on the front panel. And the other problem, of course, is that because it's not an officially supported technology by National Instruments, they carefully lock it away behind their license manager. So you can't just sort of right-click in a project window and do new XNode, at least not unless you have a magic license key that National Instruments won't give you and won't sell you and will deny its existence. But
so I can add a little bit more to that in terms of similarities and differences between XNodes and XControls. So actually all of the abilities of an XControl become part of the deliverable of that XControl. So in other words, if you use an XControl in an application that you're delivering, 100% of the code that you write becomes part of that deliverable. And XNode is a little bit different in the sense that semantically the only part of the XNode that you are delivering is this generated code underneath. So there are very, very few differences between if Gavin had written that generated code himself or if it was automatically scripted for him by the IDE with all of these callbacks. So if you right-click on that menu once more and see the list of the dozen or so callbacks that we have that are being fired by the LabVIEW IDE in order to generate this code under the hood, all of those callbacks do not become part of your distributable at all. And one distinction that I found is that when we talk about XNodes being shaky, untested, very unstable, it's actually in the development of these callbacks where it's a little bit tough and you may end up crashing LabVIEW a lot. But I think, Gavin, you said this earlier, you can write good XNodes and you can write bad XNodes. If you write a bad XNode, then it's going to crash your environment, even if you try to use the XNode, just be a user of it. However, if these callbacks are written with the correct framework in which they need to be called by the IDE, you can actually write some very, very stable XNodes. And the code that they generate is semantically not much different than if you had created a sub-VI directly. And I'm guessing I see a menu item on there called Petrify XNode. I think I may have given a good segue. Can you show us what that does? I bet I can guess.
Yep. So this is a new feature I added just in the last couple of days. So I hope it's going to work. So you'll notice that one of these abilities here is replace self. So that basically allows your XNode to go and delete itself and give the IDE some other code instead. So essentially, I've just hooked it into my structure. There's things to handle right-click menu items. There's I think it's in there. Build menu 3 is the one that does that. So petrified XNode, as it goes away and does it, bang. It's just replaced that XNode, and that's now a sub-VI, a regular LabVIEW sub-VI, that's just been written up as we went along. And I've just given it the same icon as the XNode, and it's not entirely elegant yet, but it sort of does the right sort of thing. So that's for the Michaels of this world who don't want to be touching XNodes and shipping XNodes around the place. You can develop your application and then tell your end user that you're XNode free because you've ripped them all out and replaced them with sub-VIs instead. So I thought long and hard about what to call that operation. I decided petrify was good because it's not like freezing, because freezing implies you can melt it again, whereas petrifying is somewhat irreversible, except that it turns out that undo does do what you expect it to go and do, and it undoes it back to an XNode.
Oh, brilliant. Brilliant. Cool. Yeah. So basically, if you had petrified that XNode and then you attempted to wire in a different type, of course it would break at that point because it's just a sub-VI. Yeah, it's no longer an XNode at that point.
Yeah.
So that sounds good.
So I just wanted to just go back a little bit. So there is some kind of setting. I'm just going back to this because I know a lot of people will ask this. So there is some setting or an INI key that we have to do in LabVIEW to enable
this. Yeah, so I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but I can tell you where it's written down. If you go to LavaG and you go to the code repository and you go to the OpenG array XNodes, in the README for that, it gives you the YINI keys.
Okay, so we'll put links to that in the show notes, and actually I'm going to create a special resource page on VIShots, vishots.com/xnodes. where I'm going to collate all the resources related to XNodes. So that'll be up probably by tomorrow. So you go vishots.com/xnodes, and we'll put links to all the stuff that's in there. Jack, is it okay if I jump to some of the questions?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay. So Justin Goras from JKI asks, suppose someone wanted to get started learning and writing XNodes, what's the best way to start experimenting safely? So I don't know if there is a safe way, but yeah.
Close down all your projects before you get started.
Agreed. Yes.
And then do whatever you want, but just expect it to crash quite a few times as you learn what you can and can't do. You'll be manipulating some of the XML files at some point, I'm sure.
Yes, have a good XML editor, be comfortable with editing XML manually. I think that's essentially a requirement. Would you guys agree, being able to edit XML manually?
Yeah, I mean, LavaG does have a rather nice little XNode Wizard tool available that I've certainly played around with quite a bit. That certainly speeded up creating XNodes a lot. Otherwise, you sort of have to copy an XML file and edit it by hand, and it gets really messy really fast.
Agreed, yes. And that tool, that's another one, Mike. We could put that on the resources page. That gets you about 80% of the way there, 90% of the way there, and then just the last little bit would be tweaking by hand. Actually, here's another bit of anecdotal experience. So Justin, if you want to do it safely, do not put these XNodes in your production code until you're certain that they are good, because this is one thing that I found out, is that as you are scripting XNodes, it is generating new pieces that then live in the calling diagram. Like that generated code, I'm not exactly sure what's happening under the hood, but my bet is that that generated code is actually stored within that calling diagram in some way, such that I've been able to create ghost objects that no longer I had access to through anything other than other very private internal tools like HeatPeak and such. So basically, you can irreversibly corrupt VIs as you are creating these XNodes. So always develop them on VIs that you want to throw away, and or you will certainly revert back to whatever's in source code control until you're very, very confident that you're not doing this this thing that would leave orphaned pieces in that calling VI.
So, but kind of the unstableness is mostly in the development environment, correct? Like, I mean, once you've built an executable, I don't think that there's a danger in that at that point, right?
Oh, precisely, and that's a good delineation. Like one thing that I could do is just let's see if I could show a very quick demo of an XNode, and I can show you just a taste of the complexity of what it takes to write some of these scripting VIs. Basically, you're writing scripting VIs. Who in the audience, raise your hand if you've written scripting? How long do those diagrams get? They get very, very, very long. They get very horizontal, yeah? Lots of for loops, lots of... everyone who's done this is laughing. Did you nail it the first time, or did you probably have to go back and rewrite some things? And the answer is, of course, it's a very iterative process. Except the thing about XNodes is that this iterative process is happening kind of under the hood on that diagram where you have dropped this XNode, and it's tough to kind of get there and really figure out what's going on. So yeah, it's a little bit tough to develop initially. However, once you nail it, you've got it nailed, and you don't really have to think about that problem again.
So, so thanks, Justin, for that question. If anybody else wants to ask a question, just go to vishots.com/live, and there's a link to the Google Plus version of the video where you have to be inside of Google Plus to ask a question.
We have another question I'd like to go ahead and hit from
Sure.
Brian Hoover. So Brian asked, any predictions on when, if NI will officially release XNodes? And I want to field this question because I have an opinion on it. The opinion is this. It is a I think that as XNode developers, it's not a bad thing to acknowledge that it's probably not desirable just to release it generally to everyone, because it's not something that's generally desirable. It's a concept that is very, very deep, but only targets a very, very tiny portion of customers. So in other words, it could add this huge surface area to the product of LabVIEW without making LabVIEW generally better. So I think the words you used were officially release, in the sense of when will it be publicly supported? When can I get an application engineer help me develop an XNode? I don't even think necessarily we should push for that. I would be more okay if we simply got more documentation on it, more tribal knowledge, so to speak, without necessarily going through official support channels. Personal opinion, do you guys have any thoughts on that? Do you want to see it officially released, or would you rather just get the assets needed?
I want it to be just like scripting was a few years ago, where you had to type in a special INI key but you pretty much had at it, but there's the caveat that we're not helping you with it. So, like you said, tribal knowledge, but unlock it to the point where I can put it in the Project Explorer and work with it with standard LabVIEW tools as opposed to a text editor.
Yeah, and actually, I'll twist your question even and ask it another way. So this is an exercise for the audience. Those of you who are watching this on a computer where you have LabVIEW 2013 installed, especially if you have FPGA or RT installed, drill into your National Instruments LabVIEW directory, so program files, LabVIEW 2013, do a search of that directory for *.xnode, and if somebody in the audience would just report back in this chat window how many XNodes are shipped, and especially if you have FPGA and RT installed. So to change this question around, lots and lots and lots of XNodes are actually officially released and supported and running on very time-critical targets. So the usage of XNodes arguably is officially released and supported. It's just that we need to break it into the development of XNodes. That's the part that is still not officially released or supported, I'd say.
And there's people responding in the chat to questions as well. So Darren Nattinger, who does work for National Instruments, has responded that there's no plans at the moment. So, and I would say that that's true.
I mean, if I can come in there, I think Stephen Mercer, who is well known in the community, has even gone further than that and has essentially said that the XNode implementation is just so kind of dangerously broken for developers who don't know what they're doing with it that they really don't ever want to release it.
And also Brian just chimed in for those that are wondering what the INI token is. He responded with the actual token, which is XNode Wizard mode equals true. No spaces there.
And we've got one more chat window comment from Neil Pate, who apparently has done a search of his LabVIEW folder, 85. So not knowing what all toolkits that Neil has installed, there are 85 XNodes that he could use, that he could probably drop from some of the LabVIEW palettes. Yeah.
Yeah, so XNodes is... Sorry, go ahead.
I just said I had 86, never mind.
One more.
Confirmation.
You win. And someone, Brian Hoover, says 83 with FPGA but not RT.
There you go.
So we have people in the audience with LabVIEW digging in and looking at XNodes. Awesome. Let's see here. So yeah, so I mean XNodes, as you said, Jack, they are implemented and they are being used, whether we know it or not. But we just want to make sure that there is some support down the road for us developing and working and creating our own XNodes in the development environment. So I think the way that scripting progressed and now it's open and people can use it, I think that's a good approach. There's a comment by Richard Thomas, who's also watching us. He says, the LabVIEW project provider API is similarly buggy and a rare requirement for developers, but NI felt okay to release that. So it says, I think this shows that NI is open to making these features accessible, so hopefully we can convince them to make XNodes accessible too. That's a good point. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, project providers are likewise one of these places where it's easy to crash your environment and hang your environment. But just like XNodes, once you nail all of these callback VIs, once you have those developed properly, then they become very, very stable. So project providers, and I'm glad you brought that up, Richard, those are additional things that ship with LabVIEW. For instance, the application builder has several project providers for each of the application build spec type. The source code control provider, also there's some tools on the tools network that are project providers that are written by third parties. So yes, it is a similar type technology where you can do some really powerful, really cool things with integrating into the environment. However, this concept of just generally releasing it to everyone, I feel, and this is a personal opinion, just adds to the adds a huge surface area to the product LabVIEW that makes it unnecessarily complicated for those who don't need to be doing these things.
Jonathan, I know you don't have a demo for us, but can you talk a little bit about what XNodes you've created?
Actually, I do have a demo. I opened up
okay.
an older version that does work. You know, sometimes when you're working on XNodes, they stop working for a while, but I think I can show this one. So let's see if I can do my screen share here. So when I was can everyone see this?
Looks good.
This is a series of XNodes that I did as part of a API, and what I was trying to do was create a framework that allowed me to use the observer pattern without having to create a bunch of strictly typed guys, so that I could manipulate data types such as enums. That's a great example. Specifically, I wanted to use it with classes, but this was before the user interface had some of the more complex that you needed to do an API like this. But it doesn't really matter. This is just a demonstration of how these XNodes work. So if I enable this structure, it's going to change my type of this wire, which if I turn on my help, it's going to say that it's actually just an array of queues. And you know, if I open this guy up, generated code, this is all it is. And there's some quirks to XNodes. Sometimes you see stuff like this in mine, where it's difficult to script certain actions, like sizing these. So I have like all these templates set up, and then I essentially put in a diagram disable. And so this code doesn't really exist when it gets compiled, but
can you share
it
your
sort
desktop?
of exists.
Can you share your desktop, because we're not seeing the other VIs?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
We're seeing the main VI, but not the other ones. So I think you need to share your entire desktop, not just the VI.
So I can hop in and talk a little bit about this. So basically, what you've done is recreated an API that's not unlike the queue API, where you have a constructor node. I think it's called obtain queue, and you can wire any arbitrary data type into the constructor, and then the output, the queue type, is of type queue with an inner type that was then matched to whatever it was you wired into the constructor. So like you were saying, to enable any arbitrary type is impossible with simply polymorphic VIs or regular sub-VIs. However, with XNodes, you're able to do that. So you're able to create APIs that act more like native shipping, the little post-it colored note primitives, you know, that can adapt to type, rather than the traditional user-defined APIs like just a regular LabVIEW class.
So Jonathan,
yeah, and this was after I wrote this, it was critical to do that because all these queues needed to interact very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Sub-VI calls had additional overhead, and this was the only way in LabVIEW 8.6 that you could inline a sub-VI. So like you were saying before, it's actually owned by this diagram. So it's as if I had coded all of these, you know, VIs individually, but it actually adapts to the type every single time, and they look pretty awful until you clean them up. When you're scripting, you don't put much effort into neatly aligning wires, but yeah.
Precisely.
So yeah, that's just one example. So I think I have a couple of examples here.
So this is very interesting, because what you did with XNodes was you encapsulated the complexity that would have been just boilerplate code all over the place for every single type in your application.
Exactly. And it follows a standard object-oriented pattern then, without me having to coach someone on how to build these 6 different VIs 100 different times. So this is an example of it running, and you know, as things get registered, everybody gets everything. Maybe not necessarily in the same order. I don't know what this is guaranteeing exactly, but I haven't run that in a while. And that's that's pretty much it. So here's the other thing. If you're familiar with the observer pattern, it essentially filters on different classes based on what you ask for. So XNodes can do that doesn't work. Okay, I don't want to show that one then.
No worries.
I found a version that I thought worked, but it's just sometimes the callbacks for when you have to rescript something. Oftentimes I found myself doing, and I don't know if Gavin, you can speak to the same thing, is I'll delete the entire internals of the XNodes as part of the compile operation. So all that generated code, I wipe it out because of the ghosting problem that Jack encountered. So it's really just for stability. The problem with doing that is if you're propagating through a lot of XNodes, you can incur a pretty significant compilation to redo all these block diagrams each time. So optimizing your XNode code is part of the fun, I guess you can say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly when I was saying that you could make some pretty bad XNodes. That's the problem. I mean, especially if you have XNodes in XNodes in XNodes, because then you have a whole sort of chain of recompiling and rescripting the code. So, I mean, a lot of the time what I do is I store the type of the input as part of the XNode state, so it remembers what was connected, and then it can sort of sensibly decide, well, hang on, if a type propagation has happened but my input types haven't in fact changed, then you can just say, okay, don't bother doing anything, just pass through, and that kind of makes things work a little bit more sensibly. But if you don't do things like that, then you can really slow your development environment down big time.
Yeah, I'll take this to say it's actually a good thing, John, and you can kill screen sharing. I'm looking at myself. It's kind of a time warp here. So it's actually a good thing that it has broken in this later version of LabVIEW. You said you wrote it in the 8.6 era, which was, what, about 6 years ago or so. But the reason that it's broken is because XNodes have actually undergone additional development, and they have gotten better and better since then. These callback VIs that we're talking about, if you can recall the mental picture from earlier in the episode when Gavin right-clicked on it and brought down the context help of all of the abilities menus, some of you with eagle eyes may have noticed a little D on the right-hand side of some of those nodes. And what that D stands for is deprecated. What it means is that there is now a new ability VI that supplants the old VI, connoting that further development has been done to make these better. And we see more and more of that every year over the past at least 4 or so years that I've been observing. Some of these abilities VIs are up to revision 6 of the ABI, the binary interface to those methods. So it's very hopeful in the sense that I'm very happy to see R&D resources, NI R&D resources, going to making these meta scripting capabilities even better, even more stable, even more capable as we get subsequent releases of LabVIEW.
Yeah, so that means that NI is using them, obviously, and they're valuable to them. So they're continuously improving.
Precisely.
Yeah, so I mean that's good for everyone.
Shall we take some more questions? Fabiola de la Cueva asked a good question. If you could ask NI something to make XNodes, what would that be? So, like, if we could ask NI to make something about XNodes better, what would you like to see, John or Gavin?
Well, have them available in the project window properly. That would be a good start. I mean, that really would be the killer thing to get sort of going with them. Because at the moment it's just a real pain, because you drop an XNode into your project and it just sits there with a little locked library icon and you can't do anything with it.
Yes, I agree with that. And it's a catch-22 because library ownership with members, they're both aware of each other. So you can't just edit the XML, you have to perform the linker step also. So yes, I can attest. And this issue right here is one that if you are doing it and you have this issue, go to the Lava Code CR code repository, and there is a tool there that will help you do some of these things.
Jonathan, is there anything that you would like to see?
No, that's exactly the same thing. That would make things so much easier than XML editing and trying to find the XNode with the correct tagline and everything like that. That's, I mean, just that's one thing that you need is like the knowledge of what exactly you need to put in the XML file in order to add methods, because some of these ones are not like that tool you're talking about. It's Alito Solitar. I don't know how you pronounce his name, but he created that tool, which I've used. That's how I created this as well. But it doesn't support everything, and there's a couple of errors within the tool itself that you may run into, and it's just really hard to add methods and know what the prototype of those methods are. So you end up digging through the NI code trying to find one that works in order to get it to be typed properly.
Yeah, one thing that I can say is about 80 or 90% of all the API, mad props to whoever it was that created basically the XNode framework. It works very, very well. The process of these callback VIs, the process of just creating these XNodes, it's very well thought out, and I like it a lot. It's semantic. 80 or 90% of it is like that. It's the remaining 10% where basically you just have no idea, and you can't get to 100% unless you have that remaining 10% of this tiny bit of knowledge that it takes to go ahead and complete this thing. One other thing that I would, oh man, this would be the killer feature right here, is if XNodes did not have, this goes for XNodes and XControls, if they were more closely linked to LabVIEW classes, such that their state data was an object rather than a cluster, that would allow us to reuse XNodes. Because one of the killer parts about XNodes is that every time you write an XNode, you have to write methods for all of these abilities, and it turns out that you're copying code all over the place because a lot of these methods are exactly the same. The problem with this is because an XNode acts like an LV lib or an LV class or an XCTL, there's this ownership in that there's a one-to-one ownership between a member and a library. And so therefore there's no code reuse that can happen. Whereas if they were unified with classes, not only would it give just generally a better experience developing, it would allow reuse of code that is proliferated all over the place to create XNodes. So all of that big, nasty, long diagrams of scripting code, rather than save as, save as, save as, save as for every single XNode you have, you would only have to have it in one place.
So we're slowly approaching the end of the show, and we've been pretty good over the last several months of ending on time, so I'd like to continue with that. Just one last thing, Justin Gores said, well, has anyone asked NI about these things? And what did they say? Well, I would, whenever you talk to NI about XNodes, they say, what? What are you talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about. They do not exist. And specifically, Stephen Mercer actually commented on our VI Shots Live announcement, and he said, XNodes, next you'll be asking folks to believe in tooth fairies and cows that make chocolate milk. They're a myth, I tell you, a myth. And pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. So that's his response. So yeah, I mean, that's what you get from NI when you start, which is fine. It's acceptable because, I mean, they're not officially supported, and they don't want people inundating them with issues that they can't officially respond to. So, however, I mean, I know at various events such as NI Week and one-on-one conversations, a lot of people from NI have, been a little bit open about it. So, if anyone's going to NI Week and they're talking to NI engineers, then yeah, hit them up on it. It's like, hey, when is XNodes going to be supported, and when are you going to put in the project environment and all this stuff? So, I think we should definitely voice our opinion as to what we would like NI to do.
Can I be a little bit cheeky here? And since I know we've got quite a few JKI on, how about we can add XNodes to palettes in the VI package manager and package builder? Because that would make my life an awful lot simpler. Hint, hint.
We would love to do that, but since they're not officially supported, we have to. I mean, we need support from NI to be able to do that, and obviously it's not there. So maybe we'll hack it in. We'll see. I have no problem doing it. No comments. Can I use that? I've never used that before. No comments.
Yeah, that's and I would second quick drop. Just being able to control space and then type .xno in the list is blank. Just because again, I would suppose it's filtered out because it's not.
Well,
officially
aren't XNodes? Well, isn't quick drop linked to whatever's in the palette? So I mean, if an XNode is not in the palette, then it won't show up, right?
Or the project. So even if
that's
XNode
right.
Is,
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Darren's online. I know he's listening. So. Quick drop. Why doesn't it support XNodes? Awesome. So let's close this off, and we'll just go round robin through everyone. Gavin, what's your final thoughts on XNodes?
Basically, folks just play with it. I mean, it's just fun.
Cool. Jonathan?
Same thing. They're just a lot of fun. It's an extra thing to do to learn a little bit more about how LabVIEW works under the hood.
And Jack?
Oh, and I'd say it's way more than fun. It's fun to not do work. It's fun to be strategically lazy. After you've written an XNode that's able to script things for you under the hood, you end up not copy and pasting these little idioms all over the place that then become liabilities for yourself. You create an XNode that then encapsulates the behavior of that idiom, and then you can use it on every type. So I think it's a lot of fun to not have to write code that I'm not having to write. One final thing I'll do, Jassim Shirani asked a question over here. From a production customer standpoint, aren't XNodes pretty safe in the sense that it's been scripted into the block diagram, just like any other code? Or is there something else going on? Again, I could just say an example. If you feel comfortable shipping code that has a timed loop in it, I think a timed loop itself is 2 or 3 XNodes. If you feel comfortable shipping a code with match regular expression or the new error code ring, which came out in 2012 or 2013, then likewise you should feel comfortable shipping XNodes. The one delineation there is, are XNodes created by the community as good as those that could be created by NI? That's the one part where it's this last 5%, 2%, where just having this community, not unlike say the project providers, having that just tribal knowledge and community, I think the answer could become yes at that point. So on that note, I would say if this is interesting for you, reach out directly to me, and I'm happy to show you code that I've written for XNodes. Gavin, the example that you did, can you tell us quickly where that is and downloadable right now?
Yep. There's a GitHub repository which has all of my XNodes and that example code in it as well. So it's github.com/GB119, and you'll find in there's a thing called LabVIEW bits. That's pretty bleeding edge code though, so don't go off thinking it's production quality.
Precisely. So GB119, the same as your LavaG name. So the thing that I would do is encourage those of us who want to further develop these scripting abilities, these metacode abilities in LabVIEW, that we band together in order to help each other, not as a little militia, however, but to help grow, just shine light on XNodes and show the love and really encourage NI, because they have done a fantastic job doing them, and we would just like to see more of them.
Well, thank you, Jack, for those closing comments. So that's it. That's the end of our show. I'd like to thank, of course, our wonderful guests, Gavin Burnell from the University of Leeds in the UK. Thank you, Gavin.
Cheers.
And Jonathan Kokott from Kokott Automation LLC. Thank you, Jonathan. And
thank you.
And also, thank you, Jack, for co-hosting again. It was awesome having you on.
Yeah, you bet.
And as mentioned earlier, I'm going to create a resource page, vishots.com/xnodes, where we'll have all the links that we mentioned in this show, and also, tips on how to enable XNodes and that type of thing. So look out for that. That should be live tomorrow. And thanks for watching. Send feedback if you want to send offline feedback to feedback@vishots.com. Connecting to future episodes will be always at vishots.com/live, and also you will see all previous episodes recorded, and it's all on YouTube on vishots.com/live. There's links to the YouTube page as well. If you want to get notified about upcoming shows, remember to subscribe at vishots.com/subscribe. And thanks everyone for watching. It's been awesome. I'm going to get off right now and go and code me up some XNodes. I'm really excited. I think it's pretty awesome. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.